Welcome back to the OT Unleashed Student Takeover podcast series. I'm Katie Peterson, and today we are continuing our adaptive gaming series. In our last episodes, we've talked about buttons and switches and how we can match inputs to the person. But today we are focusing on something a little bit more critical, mounts, splinting, and positioning. Erik, when we think about adaptive gaming setups, positioning always gets a little bit overlooked. Why is it such an essential part of this process?
Yeah. I mean, you're spot on with this. At the end of the day, if we can't put the buttons in the right place, then they're not going to be able to play. And positioning is often overlooked. Like we get so locked into the buttons and the joysticks, the analog sticks, and we think about, oh, that's a really cool button that they could use, or that's a really cool switch that they could use, or that analog stick is going to be great. But the reality is it's not necessarily the case, right? Like it's great if it can be in a space that they can access, right? And actually, we have a clip from one of our past episodes of a young lady who was a quadruple amputee, who it was essential to have the right positioning so that she could play. And if you guys recall, she had a very short shoulder residual limb, and she was able to articulate a joystick with that, a very small one. And then we also had a couple switches on her head. And but if we didn't have the right mounts, she would never have been able to play. So that said, positioning is huge, right? It's really everything. It's the backbone of accessibility, if you will. And I'm excited to talk about it because there are so many options. And it can get very overwhelming when you think about what goes into setting up a game, really kind of a game system, a whole game setup for somebody. So if you, for me, like the journey, if you look at when I first started doing accessibility, this was 2011, and this was when I was at the Amputee Center at Walter Reed. And I didn't really know much about mounts. I knew they existed, obviously, but we weren't really, accessibility wasn't what it is today. And I really feel like in the last 15 years, it's really just skyrocketed the potential for, accessible devices and whatnot. But at the time, I was looking for ways to get people to be able to play, and so I went back to some of my OT skills, and the OT skills that I was very comfortable with, confident with, was splinting. I knew that if I could get a piece of plastic and whatever device they were trying to work with, I could manipulate something so that they could be able to play using what they had, and then strapping something to them with splinting material. So so I will say, again, looking back, that was honestly I was so proud of those spaces, but it wasn't until I really started to understand the accessibility space where I was like, oh, there's things for this. Like there's mounts, there's actually things that are built for this. And so, so splinting is kind of where it really started for me. And honestly, it was fun. Like if you're an OT out there that, you're not sure what to do, this could be something that is a good start.
Erik, I love that you use that OT lens to kind of see how you could adapt things and use splints to really enhance that gaming experience for
Yeah.
your patients. Do you have any examples with you right now that you could kind of share with what you kind of did to help them?
Yeah, and I do, and I'm excited to show a couple of these. But before I do want to, again, go back to it's all about the client that you're working with, right? So at the end of the day, I can't mass produce these things for everybody, which is why splinting material is so nice, because you can be very intentional with the one individual that you're working with right then, right? So the first one I'm going to show is kind of it's one that I used back in the day for somebody with a residual limb who didn't have two hands. They only had one hand, but they were pretty efficient with the one hand, and they could hold everything they needed to. So what I did was I made I made a splint that would fit the residual limb. And so I actually made this one on me so that you can kind of see how it works. But think about this as, their radius, or, if they have a short below elbow or transradial amputation, you could put this right on there. And the person that I worked specifically, he had some hand, and so I actually worked with his hand. So I custom molded to his hand, and so his hand didn't work really well, but he was able to move it around. He had elbow and shoulder articulations and whatnot. So all you would do is, like, for this example, I would just pop this guy in here, and then I have my residual limb hold on to the controller, and then I can do one-handed gaming like that. It doesn't get in the way of any of the controls, but a big part of gaming is just having access to the controls and buttons themselves, So in this situation, I can kind of come over, maybe I can work the joysticks on the controller, and maybe have some other buttons like mounted around me. But this is really nice to have just something to hold on to the control itself. Otherwise, you find yourself like having a situation where if you put a control on a table, it ends up looking like this. And if I was trying to kind of work the control on its own, it's really challenging because it's constantly moving around, and I have to do this, and like it's just not really realistic, when you're trying to do if you're trying to use a traditional controller with one-handed gaming. So that was the first one. The next one that I'll do, and I kind of went with the PlayStation vibe here. It's the same kind of deal where maybe you have a situation where you want to use a controller, but either you have one hand or you can't hold the controller. Maybe you need it mounted for you to do it, but you still want to use a traditional controller. So I actually took the PlayStation controller this time, so you can kind of see a variation of controllers. And what I made was this kind of platform here. Let's see if I can give you a good visual. And we'll put some pictures up here for you. But what I'm holding is a splint on top of just a flat splinting material, and really you just kind of sit it in there just like that, and then you have yourself I just turned on my PlayStation, that's funny. And then you can again do like one-handed gaming if you wanted to, put it on a tabletop or a surface or something like that, and you can do what you need to do, and so you can kind of see how that fits in there. And so actually, if you're listening to this podcast, what I should have mentioned, that first splint that I put out again would be something that cupped onto your residual limb, and then a typical Xbox controller fits inside of the hole that would hold on to the controller. The second one was more of a almost looks like a display where it's holding up the controller at an angle so you can manipulate the controls like that. The third one I'll show is one that I made for the Xbox adaptive joystick. And again, it's just a small piece of thermoplast for your splinting material, and there is a fitting that I did, custom molded it to the Xbox adaptive joystick. And again, if it's something where I can't hold it, I can have it just mounted and sit on a table, and then kind of move it around and use my fingers one-handed to manipulate the buttons and switches. And so it's a really simple solution, but also at the same time, if I don't have a traditional mount, this is a great way to be able to mount something without having another option. So and also the splinting material is gonna be a lot cheaper than buying the other mounts, so that might be even a better option. And if you have a client and you're looking at reimbursement and you can do this with splinting material, they don't have to go out and buy mounts and whatnot. So there's a few examples. Really, there's 1,000 different things you can do with splinting material. So it's really kind of your creativity and ingenuity and that OT lens that you were talking about that would kind of drive that. So
Yeah, those are so cool. I love that you used the materials to really make that customized experience for the patient. And that's also the great thing about splinting material is like it really is fit for the individual. And then you also think about the way that you formed each controller because,
Yeah.
based off the preferences of the player, whether it be Xbox, a joystick, or a PlayStation controller, that's also another customized feature that you're doing with the splinting
Yeah.
material, which I think is really cool as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So can
Yeah.
you kind of talk about like some of the things that you've seen while you've been trying to kind of trial and error the splinting and positioning and mounting with various patients, and what kind of drew you to start using like the splinting
Yeah.
materials and instead of traditional mounts sometimes as well?
Yeah. Well, I think the splinting was always easy for me because it was something I was familiar with, and some of the assistive technology, like you'll find a lot of AT is stuff that is brand new to you, and so like you have to learn how to use it, learn um, how it works, what all these knobs and gizmos and whatnot, what they do and how to correctly use them. But splitting material is always very familiar to me. And so I felt very comfortable doing stuff. As a matter of fact, I use splitting material to like make cup holders for wheelchairs. Like, I've made splitting material that has held trombones on people's arms when they had a hemiplegic, side and they wanted to play. Like I've done so much with spinning material that I was just very comfortable with it, and so, any OT that's out there that's like, well, I don't work in hands. You don't have to work in hands to have splitting material, like you can use it in 1,000 different ways. And so, so that was, I think, the reason why I kind of went that direction first, because it was something I was familiar with. Like I was comfortable with it. I wanted to go with it. So that's what we did, initially. But, that's not to say that it's the right answer for every single patient, and which kind of leads us into all the other splints and mounts, so
Yeah.
but be comfortable with some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that that's like sometimes a little daunting for, I'm thinking about me as being a new practitioner shortly, and feeling like a little bit overwhelmed and trying to explore with splints, and using them for untraditional things.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think it's really awesome that you're sharing how you've kind of trialed and errored with them and have found very effective solutions for using it in adaptive gaming, which I think is a really
yeah,
cool thing to share and trying to, kind of show how you can keep trialing and using these things and seeing how they'll work for various patients and people with all different types of things going on, which is
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
So how would you use like traditional mounting systems
Yeah.
too? I know we've kind of talked a little bit about like the switches and the buttons and stuff, but let's like really get into how we could use like traditional mounts and stuff to enhance that experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the traditional mounts, and those are things that I think a lot of OTs will have at least seen at some point in time. The beauty of most mounting systems in general is that they use a 1/4 inch screw to mount your stuff on. And so if you look in industry, matter of fact, the adaptive joystick has its own 1/4 inch mount on it built into it, and the Xbox adaptive controller has a 1/4 inch mount onto it. The Axis controller has 1/4 inch mounts on it, because most things that historically that have mounted use this 1/4 inch threading, right? As a matter of fact, you could go back to the 80s and look at photography equipment, tripods. They would have a 1/4 inch mount system, and anything today you could put on a 1980s tripod if you wanted to. And so the nice thing is that there is this kind of universal design when it comes to the mounting systems that basically kind of give you the opportunity to kind of mix and match and kind of see what works best for you itself. But before we get into those traditional mounts, I do want to say that you have to think about what are you mounting to as well. Like, I could have great mounts, but if I don't have anything to put the mount on, it's not going to serve me at all. And so there is a lot of different ways to mount something to something. And actually, one of my favorite things to mount to is wheelchairs. A lot of my clients that I work with have wheelchairs that have a ton of bars everywhere. And so I can easily find something to clip a mount on. And so for example, like this one, this is like Lockline. This is like a Lockline clamp mount. And this Lockline you can buy online and have like a giant one, a smaller one, and it just pops in, clicks in, kind of using these articulations and whatnot. So it's a really nice clamp to have. And you can see here, this clamp at the end easily will jump onto any bar or anything that is on a wheelchair. And so it's nice to be able to pop that on, and you can actually tighten it and whatnot to for whatever your needs are for like a wheelchair or something like that. But there's other mounts out there that don't use the clamp system. It's more of a screw down kind of system. So this one is like your gooseneck, typical like a gooseneck mount. And again, there's that 1/4 inch thread that you got right there. And here's an example. If you guys are watching this, you can pop on, again, like this would be something where I can just pop on this is the adaptive joystick, and now all of a sudden the adaptive joystick can kind of go anywhere around my body with that 1/4 inch thread. But so this one is basically you can put on with like almost like a vice type of system where you just tighten it down on, like a tabletop would be really good with this. I've tried this on some wheelchairs. It'll work, but it's not like super tight, maybe not like a long-term solution, but maybe like something if you're trying out certain positions and whatnot. But that this would be like that gooseneck kind of system itself. There's other systems out there. There's REM mounts. There's mounts that are very complicated where they have different poles and different angles, and you can modify them to go in any which way, any direction, and clamp on different things. Some are meant to be on things forever. Some are meant to just easy on, easy off. But all of them typically have a way to adjust the environment to be able to fit the client itself. And so there's a lot of different ways out there that you can use it. Logitech actually comes, the Logitech adaptive button kit that we've featured before comes with a system itself, which is really nice. And it's not mounts, but it is, and I'll show you this. It's a kind of a lap type of thing. You can put it on your lap, and you can use Velcro to mount your stuff on here. And this is a fabric, 2 fabric mats that also are kind of bendy, and so they'll kind of form over top of a lap, and you can just pop these guys like right on. And actually these articulate themselves. Well, I guess I should put it on the right side, but they'll articulate themselves, and then you can put your buttons and switches on it. And anyway, you get the picture, right? Or you can go on the other side, which has almost like a tacky, like a Dyson type surface. So if you want to put something on there, it'll stick to it pretty well. And that's another way to do it, So again, I think the big key when you're looking at mounting and positioning is the humans behind it. Like, what do they need? I had a client that I was working with who had this slightest ability to move like his left thumb. And I couldn't really, get his arms out in space. Like, his arm was where it was going to be all the time. And so I really had to bring the mount and the button to where he was, because it was the only way that he was going to be able to articulate with it. And as soon as I found that perfect position for him, he was able to play. And that was kind of a big deal for everybody involved, because before, he didn't really have use of his arms and hands, and there was not a lot that he could do with it. But being able to get a button into that space was really neat, to like just have a very small movement that he could control, play video games, so, and there's a lot more to it. But, that, in itself, it was such a, an achievement, when you can find that perfect space for someone,
Right.
using mounts and stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that, we really dove deep into the evaluation process last week
Yeah.
and kind of going back to really understanding the performance skills and kind of getting that occupational profile and understanding the individual really comes into play when you are kind of trialing and erroring mounts and splints and all
Yeah.
different types of positioning because you do have to think about what they have the ability to do and also if fatigue and endurance
Oh,
and
yeah.
all
That's a
different
good
types
point.
of things come into play when you are trying to
Yeah.
figure out which is going to work best.
I mean, that's a really great point. Like fatigue and endurance is something that's also often overlooked. Matter of fact, whenever I'm working with somebody who has like a high spinal cord injury, I immediately think about finding switches for their head, so whether I'm going like lateral movements or rotational movements or flexion extension movements. Like I use this. There's a switch that I use, and if you guys are watching this, you can kind of see it. But this switch, I can basically put on the back of the head, and I can go left and right with it, and it's great. But at the same time, if for some reason like I'm playing a game that requires a lot of like manipulation of controls, like I'm gonna get fatigued pretty quick.
Yeah.
And the last thing that you want is for somebody to get fatigued when they're trying to play a game, and then later on when they really need, their head and neck movement for like ADLs or taking a shower or eating, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so fatigued, I can't even play. So you got to be careful with that. And then sometimes I'm using those bigger joints if you have options, like instead of using my head and neck, if I could use my shoulder, that's going to be so much better than, fatigue wise than if my head and neck were to be used. So that's a really great point, and I think it's something that you definitely need to consider if you're listening to this. Is don't don't not consider that. You have to consider what that looks like. So very good point there.
Yeah. Well, Eric, I just wanted to ask you one final question about like what is like a piece of advice you could like give somebody about like how to really like push the importance of positioning when it comes to adaptive gaming?
Yeah. I think, before I talk about the importance of it, I think that I also want to just say that you don't just throw a mount on somebody and it works all the time. Like I have gone through so many different scenarios with individual clients where it's like, man, I thought this was going to work, but it didn't. Or I put this clamp on or this mount on and it didn't work. And, so I had to go back to the drawing board, try this one, try this one. And so there's times where like I've had a whole treatment session where all we've been trying to do is get something to work well. And I failed and I failed and I failed, even though I thought it was the right call. And maybe you had the wrong mount. Maybe it's, not something that you anticipated not going well. But that said, failure teaches you incredible lessons. And so thankfully, I have plenty of opportunities to try different things. And so the importance is it's everything. Like I could have the greatest buttons and switches, and without the correct mounting and positioning, then I have completely missed. It won't work. You won't be able to play. So really making sure that you have a good foundation of those things first is really going to, influence the independence in gaming on your client. So that's a really great question.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you sharing the insight on that and giving practitioners a better understanding of why it matters so much
Yeah.
and sharing some of your awesome splints that you can use and, getting people excited and understanding how you can use splinting material to enhance gameplay as well. So it's
Yeah.
been an awesome conversation and I've been excited to chat with you about it this week.
Yeah, yeah, and for any of you out there that aren't sure where to start with it, you can pop over to the Rehab Arcade. We have a whole section on mounts. Matter of fact, not only where the mounts are, the ones that we featured today, but also like what they do, but also where to buy them. And so there's a lot of options for you on there. We don't make any money on this. We just have it linked for you. So don't feel like you have to buy the ones that we recommend. But there are several on there that are really good that I've had success with. So, feel free to pop over to that page if you're wanting to know where to buy those ones.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Erik, and thank you to all of our listeners for coming and listening to another episode of the OT Unleashed Student Takeover series, and we will see you next time.
All right. Bye, you guys.
Bye.